My name's Cynthia Cockburn and I live in London. I prefer to say that I'm from London rather than to say that I'm from England or Great Britain, because at least London is a very mixed city in every respect, and it's not associated with the notion of nation, such as Britain, or ethnicity, such as England. So I'm a Londoner. My work is research and sociology. I'm also a feminist activist. So you would like to ask me whether I live in a secular country? Is this the first question?
That's right.
Is England a secular country? Well, absolutely not in one respect, because the Church of England, which is the Protestant church, is called the established church. The Queen is the head of state and is also, I don't know if she's exactly the head of the church, perhaps not, but her role is one which unifies the church and state. So, no, we are not free of religion in the formation of the state. However, in practice in England, in the past, there has been rather little intrusion of the Protestant religion into civil society and into state agencies. I think I'm right in saying that it's been a kind of rather laid-back religiosity, and that we have been effectively secular. But increasingly, for different and complicated reasons, religion has started to intrude more on life in Britain. At its simplest, I suppose, one of the reasons is that our politicians, such as Tony Blair, has come out as religious. I'm not sure that he would have been so upfront about his religiousness. It's assumed that he is going to convert to Catholicism now. He's been an active Protestant Christian. But he has introduced religious language into his political discourse in a way which we have not been used to in the past. It's as though, in some sense, he is now free or entitled to do that, or there is some political mileage in it that I don't quite understand. That's just a surface phenomenon, perhaps. But I think that what has happened with the panic, if you like, about how to deal with a much more mixed country that has happened to us due to migration, has made politicians think more about the role of religion in governance. I think that's what it is. That when you have society, even I'm speaking now of before 9/11, when the language of terrorism was not current, even then there was racialized tension in cities in Britain between different communities, the predominantly Catholic or Protestant Christians and minorities such as Hindus, Sikhs and Muslims from different countries living in towns like Bradford and so on. So that, and London, which has become a very mixed city. So governance has begun to perceive a problem of how to control communities, some of which express themselves in much more religious terms than we have been used to in the past. Then with the advent of the 90s, the horrors of the Gulf War and the Balkan War and the heightening of tensions between Muslims and Christians, so-called Muslims and so-called Christians, and the attacks of 9/11 and the terrible response of the Bush administration to those attacks. The whole situation has become much more, in the situation, religion has become much more an electrifying issue. And you can see the British government seeking to control minority groups through a multiculturalist process in which they tend to give authoritative voices to the leaders of minority communities, many of whom are of religious, their politics is sometimes a religious politics. And so at times that has given authority to minority religions over their own people. And at the same time, it has somehow, I think, energized the Christian churches to become more political. So I am worried about the situation. I feel that I am a deeply secular person myself. I feel that my life chances are damaged by giving power to religious authorities, to say nothing of everybody else's life chances, especially women, since I guess it goes without saying that these religions are patriarchal, and the subordination of women has very often in history been affected by the patriarchy through religion, as well as through other things like militarization. So I think that the prospects for women are worse than they would have been a few years ago because of this process. It's quite difficult now for people to come out as secular. For example, I'm speaking now from some years back, but in Women Against Fundamentalism, which is a group that meets in London and has connections worldwide, and which is opposed to fundamentalist, i.e. political use of religion in all religions. We, at a certain moment, tried to organise school teachers to come out as secular and to resist the introduction or reimposition of religion in schools. And we found that they were quite embarrassed and diffident about doing so, as though it's a kind of an identity crisis to come out as secular. So I think that there's a lot of work to be done, and for me I really feel that this coming out, like coming out as feminist or coming out as socialist, increasingly difficult things to do because these words are stolen from us and the rug is pulled from under our feet. But to come out as secular and to be conscious in our politics, whatever they are, whether they're feminist or socialist or trade unionist or whatever else, but to assert secularism is increasingly important, if it is increasingly difficult.
How do you foresee what women will have to suffer? And what is likely to happen?
I don't think that the British legal system will go so far as to, for example, permit Sharia law to play a role in the courts in England. But I do think that if secular forces, and let us say things that should be secular, like government administrations, kowtow to religious leadership that are exploiting religion for political purposes, this will give those authorities, whether they're English and Christian or whether they're of some other religion and are minorities in England, it will give them legitimacy in reimposing authority over women, containing them in a domestic role, limiting their sexual freedoms and their freedom to express their own identity, whether as lesbians or whatever. And I just think that it will be a disaster, and it will be, for me, one of the aspects of a setback for feminism. Not the only one, because even within secularism there are other setbacks for feminism. But that's one of them. Because religion is, in my view, religions are universally bad for women. especially the monotheistic religion.
I was thinking of the school system in which, for instance, Muslim fundamentalists are pushing for girls and boys to go through different courses.
Mm. This is problematic, actually, because, yes, I think any religious school is a bad idea, and this is connected with the privatization of education.
Yeah.
I was born and brought up in the post-war world in which comprehensive education was state education. It was the same for all children, and it was effectively secular. Of course, it turned out later that it was not. It was really Christian. It came out as Christian more when there was pressure from other religions for expression in education. Then we began to see the truly Christian nature of British education. But up to that point, it had been kind of laid back. But recently, as part of the struggle of the state to keep control of what it sees as a threatening situation with many minority cultures angling for their position in British society, the state has been obliged, or has felt obliged, to make more provision for organisations like churches to offer their own forms of education, so that there can be state-aided. I'm not an expert in education, but I kind of effectively state-aided or state-supported schools of a particular religious colour. Once that right is given to one religion, the others are then inspired to organise their own schools. The question, and religion as a whole, becomes more and more religified and less secular. The question of educating girls and boys separately is a little bit tricky, because I think in many cases, in many ways, it's important that boys and girls are educated together, especially if the excuse for separating them is some religion-inspired cultural imperative. But at the same time, those of us who were working on girls' achievement in schools found some years back that girls achieve better in single-sex schools, especially in subjects like science and mathematics. In the mixed-sex schools, the boys climb on the backs of girls in many ways, and girls get pushed out of and down in the scale within those subjects which tend to be thought of as masculine. And so good girls' schools were producing good women scientists and good women engineers and so on, more than in the mixed schools. So in many ways I'm in favour of girls-only schools, but not in the least in favour of them if they're an excuse for introducing religion or are set up for that purpose.
From what I understand, the Muslim fundamentalists wanted girls to be excluded from biology, arts, music, sports, etc.
They wanted them to be excluded from those subjects.
Yes. So
I would have thought that was actually illegal within the British education system.
Even in
any school.
Religious schools.
Even in religious schools. I would have thought if the state, well, there would certainly be a good case for a big struggle over that. If the state has any kind of control or subsidy or monitoring role over education, primary and secondary education, which I'm sure it retains even in the case of religious schools, I think to exclude girls from certain subjects would be illegal in Britain, and there would be a case for a big fight over it.
Okay.
But what actually goes on inside the schools, of course, you know, is not necessarily seen by the inspectors.
Mm-hmm.
But I wish I was an expert on education and could speak with more authority about it. These are just hunches that I have.
There's one thing that comes to my mind. This recent decision by the UN General Assembly to request all states to inscribe in their constitution respect for religion and prophets, and to modify their laws and their educational system to be in keeping with this respect.
I think it's a very dangerous move. I can understand where it comes from. That I can understand. I think it's very difficult at this point. We're treading the thin line between ethnicity, culture on the one hand, and religion on the other. Of course, it's important to be respectful of different ethnicities and cultures, but to privilege religious expression, as I understand it, so that the law of blasphemy could be used against people who speak ill of religion, is a very bad move, because it curtails freedom of speech, and I don't think one should give a particular kind of respect to religious thought and expression that one does not give to other kinds of thought and expression and philosophy. If we can't mock God, we're in big trouble.
Especially at a time when you see it's hard for people to declare themselves secular.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And at a time when fundamentalists call us secularists, bad names, and threaten to kill us.
Yeah, sure, exactly.
Do you think, is there something you would like to add that we haven't touched upon?
What I do think is very important that as women we understand the issue much better than I understand it myself. But above all, that we should work together on this, that there are women coming, almost all of us. It's a huge privilege to come from an atheist background. In England, there are very few people who have the luxury of coming from an atheist background. Most of us are emerging from a religion of one kind or another. And my family was Protestant, Protestant Christian. They went to church once a month as a kind of moral and cultural obligation, but there was not a very deep religious sense within my household. Even for me, it was difficult to break, however, from that tradition. And I still find the inhibitions in myself to come out and speak as secular. For example, to use the phrase I just used, mock God, costs me something, even now. Despite all the thinking I've done and all the help I've been given, it still costs me to say that. Now, if that is the case for me, I think it's the case for the great majority of people of every kind of ethnic background in England. And those of us who are struggling with this, whether we are ex-Muslim, ex-Sikh, ex-Jain, ex-Jew, ex-Christian, as feminists, we need to work together to understand how religiosity is self-reinforcing across the religions. That when religion itself has a kind of moral status and authority, such as the blasphemy law would give it, we have to see that as feminists we need to work with each other, because each of us understands the background we've come from, and we need to work within those communities. But we need feminist strength and organising across the communities to do that. And that's why when our group Women Against Fundamentalism was much more active in England than it is now, it was such a wonderful group to be in, because we were women with backgrounds in all these religions, and it was very informative for us to work together, and I think potentially gave us a basis for working outwards into the communities.
Is there a chance that WAF will be revived? And
well, in some ways WAF exists because there are meetings continuing between the women of the original group and new ones. The journal which we used to publish folded, and although those journals are still available on the website is not being used, as far as I'm aware, for new developments. I think it is more or less just a discussion group now. I've not heard of any proposals for for becoming an activist group again, but it would be wonderful if there were, and I may be misinformed.